You know, I've been working in the court system for 37 years, and I thought I'd seen every kind of human tragedy you could imagine. Name's Bill Morrison, Vietnam veteran. Been a court reporter in downtown Phoenix since 1987. Every day I sit in that corner, fingers flying across my stenotype machine while life's worst moments play out in front of me. Drug dealers, drunk drivers, domestic violence cases, same sad stories, different faces, all blending together after nearly 4 decades. But November 15th, 2023 was different. That was the day I watched the justice system nearly destroy a man who'd given everything for this country, and then watched one judge risk her entire career to make it right. That was the day I learned that sometimes the system works exactly the way it's supposed to, but only when good people are willing to fight for what's right. This story's gonna make you mad as hell, but stick with me, because the ending will restore your faith in justice, even when it takes 37 years to arrive. It started like any other Wednesday morning in Judge Sarah Martinez's courtroom. November in Phoenix is actually pleasant, sunny, mid-70s, the kind of weather that makes you forget how brutal the summer was. Judge Martinez was working through her usual docket of misdemeanor cases: petty theft, disorderly conduct, public intoxication, the kind of low-level stuff that keeps municipal courts busy and pays for the lights. I'd been working with Judge Martinez for about 5 years, ever since she got appointed to the bench. Good judge, tough but fair, former prosecutor who'd seen enough real evil to know the difference between genuine criminals and people just trying to survive. She didn't get her kicks from crushing people, but she also didn't tolerate nonsense or repeat offenders who thought the system was a joke. Around 10:30 a.m., right after we'd finished with a domestic disturbance case that ended with a restraining order and mandatory anger management, they brought in the homeless guy. Now, I've seen plenty of homeless defendants over the years. Usually they're in for trespassing, public intoxication, shoplifting food, the kinds of crimes that come with sleeping rough and trying to survive on the streets. Most of them shuffle in defeated, looking at their shoes, just going through the motions until they can get back out there and continue the daily struggle of staying alive. This guy was different from the moment he walked through those courtroom doors. He entered in handcuffs, but he walked into that courtroom like he was reporting for duty. Had to be in his late 60s, early 70s, weathered face that had seen some hard living, but his shoulders were back and his head was up. His clothes had definitely seen better days: faded jeans, worn work boots, a military surplus jacket that was probably older than the bailiff. But everything was clean and carefully maintained. His gray hair was neatly combed, and even though his face was lined with the kind of deep wrinkles that come from years of sleeping outside and too many meals skipped, there was something in his eyes that the streets hadn't been able to touch. A dignity, a sense of purpose, something that said this man had been somebody before life knocked him down. As he walked to the defendant's table, I noticed he favored his left leg slightly, the way guys do when they've got old shrapnel or took a bullet somewhere that didn't heal quite right. I should know. I've got a piece of Vietnamese steel in my hip that reminds me every morning when I get out of bed that I'm not 22 anymore. The bailiff, Carlos Mendez, good guy who'd been working courts for about 15 years, called the case number 47B, State of Arizona versus Mason Joseph Quinn. Charges are criminal trespassing, loitering with intent, and resisting arrest. Mason Quinn shuffled forward in his ankle shackles, but somehow managed to make even that look dignified. When he reached the defendant's table, he stood at what could only be described as a modified parade rest, feet shoulder-width apart, hands clasped behind his back, eyes forward. The prosecutor was some young kid named Bradley Hutchinson, probably 3 years out of law school, wearing a suit that cost more than most people make in a month. clean-cut, ambitious, perfectly styled hair, the kind of guy who saw homeless veterans as stepping stones on his way to a better job. I'd watched him for the past year, and he had that particular brand of callousness that comes from never having experienced real hardship. "Your Honor," Hutchinson began in that nasal voice that immediately made you want to punch him, "Mr. Quinn was discovered trespassing behind Giuseppe's Italian restaurant on Jefferson Street at approximately 11:45 p.m. on November 10th. When approached by Officer Reynolds and ordered to move along, the defendant became belligerent and resisted arrest. He paused dramatically, like he was prosecuting the crime of the century instead of a homeless guy trying to stay warm. This is Mr. Quinn's fourth arrest this year for similar offenses, Your Honor. The defendant clearly has no intention of modifying his behavior or respecting private property rights. The state recommends 60 days in county jail and a permanent ban from the downtown business district." Judge Martinez looked over her reading glasses at the defendant. She had this way of studying people, like she was trying to see past whatever facade they were presenting and figure out who they really were underneath. "Mr. Quinn, do you have legal representation?" "No, ma'am," Quinn replied, and his voice had that particular quality you hear in career military. Clear, respectful, but not submissive. There was authority in it, even under these circumstances. "My court-appointed attorney is tied up with an emergency hearing elsewhere." "I see. Would you like to make a statement on your own behalf?" Quinn straightened up a little more, if that was even possible. "Your Honor, I wasn't causing any trouble. I wasn't bothering customers or panhandling or making noise. I was just trying to stay warm. The restaurant's kitchen vent throws off some heat, and with the temperature dropping below freezing the past few nights—" "Your Honor," Hutchinson interrupted with obvious irritation, "Mr. Quinn was specifically ordered by Officer Reynolds to vacate the premises. When he refused to comply, he was placed under arrest for criminal trespassing and resisting arrest." "I asked for 5 more minutes to finish eating, sir," Quinn said calmly. "The cook, Jimmy Rossetti, had given me a sandwich and I was trying to—" "The defendant has a pattern of this behavior." Hutchinson cut him off again. "He's been warned repeatedly about loitering behind restaurants in the downtown area. At some point, we have to hold people accountable for—" "Let him finish," Judge Martinez said sharply, her dark eyes flashing with annoyance. Hutchinson's mouth snapped shut. Quinn looked directly at the judge, making eye contact in a way that most defendants wouldn't dare. "Your Honor, I understand I was on private property, but I wasn't looking for trouble or trying to cause problems. I was just trying to stay alive until morning. I don't beg, I don't bother customers, I don't leave messes. I just sit quietly in the alley and try to keep warm for a few hours." Something about the way he said it, not self-pity or making excuses, just stating the facts with military precision, made me look up from my stenotype machine for the first time all morning. This wasn't the usual homeless defendant making wild justifications or blaming society for his problems. Judge Martinez consulted the paperwork in front of her. "Mr. Quinn, I see here in your file that you're a military veteran. What branch of service?" "United States Marine Corps, Your Honor. Served from 1974 to 1996. 22 years of service?" "Yes, ma'am. 3 combat deployments, 2 tours in Vietnam, 1 in the Gulf War." Judge Martinez made a note on her pad. "And what's your current living situation, Mr. Quinn?" "Homeless, Your Honor. Past 18 months, since I lost my apartment." "Are you receiving any VA benefits or disability compensation?" For the first time since he'd entered the courtroom, Quinn's military bearing cracked slightly. His jaw tightened, and I saw his hands clench behind his back. "No, ma'am. I've been fighting the VA for my benefits since I was discharged in 1996, 27 years and counting." That's when I really started paying attention. 22 years as a Marine, including combat tours and no VA benefits after 27 years of fighting? Something was seriously wrong with this picture. Hutchinson jumped back in, sensing he was losing control of his simple case. Your Honor, regardless of Mr. Quinn's military service, he's repeatedly violated city ordinances. We need to send a clear message that— What's your VA claim number, Mr. Quinn? Judge Martinez interrupted, her tone suddenly much more serious. Hutchinson looked confused. Your Honor, I'm not sure how the defendant's VA status is relevant to charges of criminal trespassing. Mr. Quinn? Judge Martinez repeated, ignoring the prosecutor. Quinn rattled off a 9-digit number without hesitation, the same way he'd probably recited his serial number thousands of times during his military career. Judge Martinez wrote it down carefully, then did something I'd never seen her do in 5 years of working her courtroom. She called her clerk over and whispered something in her ear. The clerk nodded and left the courtroom. Court will be in recess for 45 minutes, Judge Martinez announced, banging her gavel. Mr. Quinn, please remain in the courtroom with the bailiff. During the recess, I watched Quinn sitting alone at the defendant's table. He didn't fidget or look around nervously like most defendants. He didn't try to make conversation with the bailiff or crane his neck to see what was happening. He just sat there, ramrod straight, staring at his hands, lost in thoughts that were probably 50 years old. After about 20 minutes, I made a decision that probably wasn't protocol, but felt like the right thing to do. I got up from my corner and walked over to sit beside him. Marine Corps, huh? I said quietly. He looked at me with surprise, probably the first person to speak to him like a human being all day. Yes, sir. You serve? Army, Vietnam, 1971 to 73, 25th Infantry Division. Bill Morrison. I extended my hand. Mason Quinn, Staff Sergeant, retired. 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines. Honor to meet you, sir. His handshake was firm, calloused from years of hard work. 22 years is a hell of a career, I said. What happened with the VA? Quinn's jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he spoke, his voice carrying 27 years of frustration. Filed my first disability claim 3 months after I got out in 1996. PTSD, TBI from an IED blast in Iraq, hearing loss from artillery, shrapnel in both legs from Vietnam, spine compression from carrying full gear for 22 years. Every piece of documentation was in order, witnesses from my unit, medical records from field hospitals. He paused, staring at his hands again. First claim got denied. Insufficient medical evidence, they said, so I got more medical exams. Second claim got denied because my military medical records were incomplete. Turns out half my records from Vietnam got lost in a fire at the National Personnel Records Center in 1973. Third claim got denied because I missed a medical appointment. They'd scheduled it for the same day I was having emergency surgery. I felt that familiar anger building up in my chest, the same rage I'd felt when I came home from Vietnam and spent 2 years fighting for basic medical care for wounds I'd gotten serving my country. Been through 3 different attorneys over the years, Quinn continued. Dozens of medical exams, hundreds of forms, thousands of pages of documentation. System keeps moving the goalposts. Every time I submit what they ask for, they come up with some new requirement or technicality. Jesus Christ, I muttered. 27 years? 27 years and counting. Last attorney told me to give up, said the VA was never going to approve my claim. Said some veterans just fall through the cracks and there's nothing anybody can do about it. What kind of work were you doing before? I gestured around the courtroom. Construction, mostly. Ironwork, welding, some carpentry. Good money when I could get it, but the back and leg injuries made it harder every year. Finally got to the point where I couldn't pass the physical requirements anymore. Lost my job, couldn't make rent, lost my apartment. Family? Quinn's expression darkened. Wife left me in 2018. Said she was tired of living with someone who was always angry about the past. Couldn't blame her, really. PTSD doesn't make you easy to live with. Kids, well, they took her side. Haven't spoken to them in 3 years. Where you sleeping these days? Wherever I can. Sometimes there's space at the Central Arizona shelter, but they've got a 3-day limit and a waiting list, usually under the 7th Avenue overpass or behind buildings downtown where there's some protection from the wind. Winter's getting bad, though. Last few nights have been below freezing, and it's only November. Before I could respond, Judge Martinez returned to the bench. But she wasn't alone. Following her was a woman in a business suit, carrying a thick folder, and behind her was a man I recognized as Detective Ray Castellanos from the Phoenix PD's Veteran Outreach Unit. "Court is back in session," Judge Martinez announced. She looked like someone who'd just gotten some very disturbing news. "Ms. Patricia Coleman from the Arizona Veterans Legal Aid Society has joined us, along with Detective Castellanos." Ms. Coleman approached the bench. She was maybe 45, graying hair pulled back in a bun, the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent years fighting bureaucracy on behalf of people who couldn't fight for themselves. "Your Honor, I've spent the last 45 minutes reviewing Mr. Quinn's VA file with my contacts at the regional office. There are some serious irregularities that need to be addressed immediately." Hutchinson looked like someone had just changed the rules of the game without telling him. "Your Honor, I object to this irregular procedure. The defendant's VA status has no bearing on—" "Overruled," Judge Martinez said firmly. "Ms. Coleman, please continue." "Your Honor, Staff Sergeant Quinn has been entitled to full VA disability benefits since his discharge in 1996. His claims were properly documented and should have been approved decades ago. The delays and denials appear to be the result of systematic administrative errors and what can only be described as bureaucratic malfeasance." The courtroom went dead quiet. You could hear the air conditioning humming. "What kind of malfeasance?" Judge Martinez asked. Ms. Coleman opened her folder and pulled out several documents. "Your Honor, I've discovered that Mr. Quinn's case was handled by the same VA claims examiner for 12 years, a man named Douglas Whitman, who was eventually fired in 2019 for deliberately delaying and denying claims from minority and lower-income veterans." She handed a document to the judge. Whitman's personnel file, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request, shows that he was under investigation for bias in handling veteran claims. Mr. Quinn's case was one of 247 claims that Whitman deliberately sabotaged. Hutchinson finally found his voice. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Even if there were issues with Mr. Quinn's VA benefits, it doesn't excuse criminal behavior." "Actually, it does," Detective Castellanos interjected. "Judge Martinez asked me to review the arrest reports and body camera footage from Mr. Quinn's previous arrests." He pulled out his own folder. "In every case, Staff Sergeant Quinn was arrested for what we call survival activities, trying to stay warm, trying to find food, trying to stay alive on the streets. In every case, he was polite, cooperative, and non-threatening. The resisting arrest charges were added because he asked for a few more minutes to gather his belongings or finish eating." Judge Martinez turned back to Ms. Coleman. "What would Mr. Quinn's disability compensation have been if his claims had been properly processed? Based on his documented service-connected disabilities, approximately $3,400 per month for the past 27 years, plus full medical coverage, housing allowances, and educational benefits, with retroactive payments and interest. We're looking at approximately $1.2 million in back benefits. You could have heard a pin drop in that courtroom." Quinn was sitting perfectly still, but I could see his hands shaking slightly. Judge Martinez leaned back in her chair, and I could see the wheels turning. After 37 years in the court system, I knew when a judge was getting ready to make a decision that would change everything. "Ms. Coleman, how quickly can Staff Sergeant Quinn's benefits be restored?" If we file an emergency appeal with expedited review citing the Whitman investigation, we could have temporary benefits within 72 hours and full benefits restored within 2 weeks. Do it, Judge Martinez ordered. I want it filed today. She turned to Hutchinson, and her expression was not friendly. Counselor, you're asking me to jail a decorated combat veteran for trying to stay warm on a freezing night, while the government that sent him to war has been illegally denying him benefits for 27 years because of a corrupt bureaucrat? Hutchinson opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time all morning he looked uncertain. Furthermore, Judge Martinez continued, Detective Castellanos' investigation shows that Mr. Quinn has been repeatedly arrested for crimes of survival while living in conditions that no veteran should ever have to endure. These charges are not just inappropriate, they're unconscionable. She banged her gavel once, firmly. All charges against Staff Sergeant Quinn are hereby dismissed with prejudice. But Judge Martinez wasn't done, not by a long shot. Miss Coleman, I want a full investigation into how many other veterans have been affected by this Whitman situation. Detective Castellanos, I want you to review every arrest of a homeless veteran in the downtown area for the past 5 years and determine how many were for survival-related activities. She looked directly at Quinn. Staff Sergeant Quinn, I'm ordering the court to provide you with emergency assistance. Bailiff Mendez will escort you to the Veterans Service Center immediately to ensure you get connected with emergency housing today. Hutchinson tried one more time. Your Honor, with all due respect, I understand the sympathy for Mr. Quinn's situation, but we can't just dismiss criminal charges because Judge Martinez turned on him with the kind of cold fury I'd only seen a few times in my career. Counselor, if you want to appeal my decision, that's your right. But I suggest you think very carefully about how it's going to look when the media finds out that your office spent taxpayer money prosecuting a Bronze Star recipient for trying not to freeze to death while a corrupt VA employee illegally withheld his benefits for nearly 3 decades. She paused, letting that sink in. I also suggest you consider how it's going to look when they find out that instead of investigating the systematic failure of our veterans' services, you chose to criminalize the victims of that failure. Hutchinson gathered his papers and left without another word, his face red with embarrassment and anger. After court adjourned, I watched as several people approached Quinn. Ms. Coleman immediately pulled out her phone and started making calls about emergency housing. Detective Castellanos was coordinating with the Veterans Service Center. Even the bailiff was making phone calls on Quinn's behalf. But the moment that really got to me was when Judge Martinez stepped down from the bench and walked over to Quinn. She removed her judicial robe and approached him as just another person. Staff Sergeant Quinn, she said, extending her hand, on behalf of a system that failed you catastrophically, I apologize. This should never have happened. Quinn stood at attention and shook her hand. Thank you, Your Honor. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything. You've already given more than enough. Ma'am, can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you do this? Most judges would have just processed the case and moved on. Judge Martinez was quiet for a moment. Then, my father was a Vietnam veteran, Staff Sergeant Quinn. He came home in 1968 and spent 15 years fighting the VA for benefits they should have given him immediately. He died in 1983, still fighting, still believing that the system would eventually do right by him. She paused, her voice getting softer. I became a prosecutor, then a judge, because I believed in justice. But justice isn't just about following the law. It's about making sure the law serves the people who need it most. Today, the law served you. Finally. 3 weeks later, Quinn came back to court. But this time he was a visitor, not a defendant. He found me during a break between hearings. The transformation was remarkable. He was wearing clean clothes that actually fit properly. Khakis, a button-down shirt, decent shoes. His hair was professionally cut, and he'd put on probably 20 pounds. But the biggest change was in his eyes. The haunted look was gone, replaced by something I hadn't seen that first day. Hope.
Bill, I wanted to thank you for sitting with me that day, for treating me like a human being instead of a problem to be solved. How are you doing, Mason?
Better than I've been in 27 years. Got my benefits restored, back pay came through last week. Found a nice apartment in Tempe, nothing fancy, but it's clean and warm and it's mine. VA finally approved my disability rating at 100% service-connected. That's outstanding news. Ms. Coleman says they've identified 63 other veterans who got screwed over by this Whitman character. They're working on getting all of them sorted out. Good. How are you handling everything? That's a lot of change after living on the streets. Quinn was quiet for a moment, and I could see him thinking about how to answer. It's strange, you know. For 27 years, I went to sleep every night angry at the VA, angry at the system, angry at myself for not being able to make it work, angry at my wife for leaving, angry at my kids for taking her side, just angry all the time. He looked around the courthouse, watching lawyers and defendants and families dealing with their own crises. Now I wake up in my own bed, in my own apartment, and for the first 5 minutes every morning I think it's a dream. Then I remember Judge Martinez and you and Ms. Coleman, and I realize that sometimes the system actually works. It just takes the right people being in the right place at the right time.
What are you going to do now? Ms. Coleman offered me a job. Veteran advocate helping other guys navigate the VA system. Turns out 22 years as a Marine teaches you how to cut through bureaucratic bullshit and get things done.
I laughed. That sounds perfect. Bill, can I ask you something? Why did you sit with me that day? You didn't know me from Adam. I thought about it for a moment, the same question Quinn had asked Judge Martinez. Because 37 years ago I was sitting in a different courthouse, fighting the VA for benefits they said I didn't deserve. And some old World War II veteran sat with me and told me not to give up. Said we take care of our own, even when the system doesn't. Quinn nodded slowly. Pass it forward? Pass it forward. 6 months later, something remarkable happened. Judge Martinez announced the creation of the Veterans Justice Initiative. Every Thursday morning, her courtroom became a special session for veterans facing charges related to homelessness, addiction, mental health issues, or other problems stemming from their service. Instead of prosecution, veterans got connected with services. Instead of jail time, they got treatment. Instead of criminal records that followed them forever, they got help rebuilding their lives. The program was so successful that courts in 12 other states started similar initiatives. Mason Quinn became the Veterans Legal Aid Society's first full-time advocate, and in his first year on the job, he helped 34 veterans get their benefits restored. His success rate was remarkable. Turns out, when a former staff sergeant who'd been through the system starts raising hell with bureaucrats, things get done fast. But the case that meant the most to him came about 8 months after his own charges were dismissed. It was a Thursday morning in Judge Martinez's Veterans Court, and they brought in a woman who looked like she was barely hanging on. Sarah Mitchell, Army veteran, Iraq and Afghanistan, living in her car with her 2 young kids. Arrested for sleeping in a park because she had nowhere else to go. When Quinn heard her story, combat medic, multiple tours, PTSD and TBI, VA benefits denied for insufficient documentation, he knew exactly what he was dealing with. Judge Martinez, Quinn said, standing up in the gallery, I'd like to request permission to advocate for Ms. Mitchell. Of course, Mr. Quinn. Quinn approached the bench with a folder full of paperwork he'd prepared after talking to Sarah the night before. Your Honor, Ms. Mitchell's case has all the hallmarks of the Douglas Whitman situation we dealt with last year, claims denied on technicalities, medical records mysteriously lost, appeals rejected for bureaucratic reasons. He handed the judge a document. I took the liberty of contacting Ms. Coleman yesterday. She's already started the emergency appeal process. We should have Ms. Mitchell's benefits restored within days.
Judge Martinez smiled. And housing?
Veterans Village has a family unit available immediately. Ms. Mitchell and her children can move in today. That afternoon, I watched as Sarah Mitchell signed the paperwork for her new apartment while her kids played in the courtyard of Veterans Village. Quinn was sitting on a bench, helping her understand her VA benefits package, but really just being there to answer questions and provide reassurance. "How many more are out there?" Sarah asked him. "Too many," Quinn replied.
"But we're going to find them. All of them."
2 years later, the Veterans Justice Initiative had become a national model. Quinn's advocacy program had helped over 200 veterans get their benefits restored. Douglas Whitman was facing federal charges for defrauding veteran benefit programs. But the moment that made me proudest came on a rainy Thursday morning in March. I was setting up my equipment in Judge Martinez's courtroom when I noticed a familiar figure in the gallery. Mason Quinn was there, but this time he wasn't alone. Sitting next to him was a young man in his 20s, wearing a military uniform. During a break in the proceedings, I walked over to say hello.
"Mason, good to see you. Who's your friend?" Quinn stood up with obvious pride.
"Bill, I'd like you to meet my son, Staff Sergeant Michael Quinn, United States Marine Corps, just back from deployment in Syria."
The young man stood and shook my hand.
"Honor to meet you, sir. My dad's told me a lot about what you did for him."
"Your dad's the one who did all the heavy lifting."
"Actually," Michael said, "my dad's the one who taught me that sometimes you have to swallow your pride and ask for help. And sometimes you have to fight for people who can't fight for themselves." I looked at Quinn.
"Your family?"
"We're working on it," Quinn said quietly. "Michael reached out after he saw a news story about the Veterans Court program. We've been talking regularly. My daughter, that's going to take more time, but we're making progress."
"And your ex-wife?"
Quinn smiled, the first time I'd ever seen him look genuinely happy. "Maria and I are taking things slow. Turns out 27 years of anger can damage a marriage, but it doesn't have to destroy it. We're in counseling, working through things." After they left, I sat in that courtroom thinking about everything I'd witnessed over the past 2 years. A broken system that had failed a good man for nearly 3 decades, a judge who chose justice over procedure, an advocate who turned her personal tragedy into a mission to help others, a veteran who channeled his anger into action. Most of all, I thought about something Judge Martinez had said during one of our conversations. Justice isn't about following the rules perfectly. It's about making sure the rules serve the people they're supposed to protect. These days, whenever I see a homeless veteran in downtown Phoenix, I think about Mason Quinn, about how easy it would have been for the system to process his case like thousands of others. 60 days in county jail, a criminal record, and back to the streets to continue the cycle of survival and arrest. Instead, one judge decided to ask the right questions. One advocate decided to dig deeper. One veteran decided to pay it forward. And a man who'd been forgotten by his country for 27 years became the catalyst for changing how we treat the people who served. That's what real honor looks like, not the medals on your chest, but what you do when you see someone who needs help. Not the uniform you wore, but how you treat the person standing next to you when they're at their lowest point. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you get to witness the exact moment when justice finally catches up with truth, when the system remembers what it's supposed to stand for, and when a forgotten hero gets the recognition he should have had all along. Mason Quinn served his country for 22 years, then spent 27 more years fighting for the benefits he'd earned. But his real victory wasn't getting his money or his benefits restored. His real victory was turning his suffering into a mission to make sure no other veteran would have to go through what he went through. That's a story worth telling, and a lesson worth remembering. Every single time. As I finish typing this story, I can see through the courthouse windows to Veterans Village, where Sarah Mitchell is dropping her kids off at the daycare center before heading to her new job as a medical technician. Where Mason Quinn is sitting on a bench with another veteran, helping him fill out forms and navigate the system that almost destroyed them both. Some battles take 27 years to win, but they're worth fighting, because they're not really about the people who start them. They're about the people who come after, and the promise that in America, no one who served their country should ever have to fight for survival on the streets they once defended. That's the real meaning of leave no one behind, and sometimes it takes a homeless veteran, a determined judge, and a courtroom full of people willing to do the right thing to remind us what that promise really means.